Namaste, everybody, and welcome to Sangam Talks today. And today we are doing a very, very important session. It's the first part in a series called Luminaries of Bengal. And today's
We
episode
are doing a
is
very, very important session. It's the first part in a series.
so the session is titled as Luminaries of Bengal, as you can see, and we are dedicating this to Raja Ram Mohan Roy. So let's just get everything out there and decide on the basis of facts and sound arguments made by esteemed panelists on our panel today. So let me introduce the distinguished speakers and guests that we have on our panel today. Dr. Professor Bruce Carlyle Robertson. He's an author, film script writer, filmmaker. Professor Robertson has been a faculty member at the Johns Hopkins University with noted contributions in global higher education. His PhD from the University of Pennsylvania was focused on South Asian and Middle Eastern affairs, with extensive field research in local languages and study of literature, linguistics, anthropology, history, and international political economy. And I was delighted to learn that he also learned Bengali, adding great depth to his work on the history of the region. With a strong background in South Asian and Middle Eastern arts, he has been a consultant to a South Asian American organization and served several non-profit global organizations in policy analysis, negotiations, political science, and building democratic institutions in South Asia. He has authored books which include Raja Ram Mohan Roy, The Father of Modern India, The Essential Writings of Raja Ram Mohan Roy, and the upcoming Raja Ram Mohan Roy, The First Global Indian. He also delivered lectures on Hinduism and contributed several articles in international journals, including a paper on Swami Vivekanand and Rajarshi Ram Mohan Roy. Two views on sacred authority, two visions of modern India. That was the paper. And a chapter on Ram Mohan Roy in a comprehensive history of modern Bengal, volume 2. So, Dr. Robertson's books are available. Please do go and read proper academic studies on Rajarshi Ram Mohan Roy. The other esteemed panelist we have is Dr. Professor Amiya Prasad Sen. He is a noted historian with an interest in the intellectual and cultural history of modern India. After a brief career in Indian civil services, Dr. Sen took up teaching and research in 1984. Currently, he is an honorary fellow at the Oxford Centre for Hindu Studies, Oxford, UK, and was formerly a Shivadasani Fellow there. He previously held the positions of Hendrik Zimmer Chair at South Asia Institute, Heidelberg University, the Agatha Harrison Fellow to the University of Oxford, Visiting Fellow to the Indian Institute of Advanced Study, Shimla, the Center for Contemporary Studies, Nehru Memorial Museum and Library, New Delhi, and he served as Professor of Modern Indian History at Jamia Millia Islamia, New Delhi, during 2007-2008, and he was Tagore Professor at Vishwabharati, Shantiniketan. Dr. Sen did his postgraduate and doctoral studies at St. Stephen's College, University of Delhi, and he's been a prolific writer and authored several books and papers on history, on key historical personalities, the history of Hindu religion and society, the development of Hindu thought and traditions. His works include Ram Mohan Roy, a critical biography, social and religious reforms, the Hindus of British India, the idea of social reform and its critique among Hindus of 19th century India, Bankim Chandra Chattopadhyay and the Vaishnav revival in Bengal, Hindu revivalism in Bengal, some essays and interpretation, and many, many, many others. With this brief introduction, I would now like to hand over this to Dr. Robertson, who will cover a lesson known as the lesser known aspects of Raja Ram Mohan Roy in his talk today, which is his international persona and contributions towards an emergent global consciousness.
Do you want to play
Professor,
the video first?
yes. And before that, I must also let you know that we are doing this in collaboration with Abar Bangla. I will just play the video of Kanchan Bandyopadhyay who is the founder of Abar Bangla, and I would just put the video on for everybody to watch. Just give me a second. Chandanda, you have joined. I'll add you to the stream. We'll just play the video in a second. I welcome Chandan Bandyopadhyay ji. Chandan ji, we welcome you here, and I would just like to give a brief introduction of Chandanda as well, and he would be moderating the session today. So, welcome Chandanda. I'll just give a brief intro before I play the video of Abar Bangla. Just give me 1 minute to read out the introduction of. So, Chandan Bandyopadhyay ji is he studied business management and computer science from one of the prestigious universities in Boston, USA. He is formerly an engineer with Lockheed Martin, USA, with Houghton Mifflin Harcourt, oldest and prestigious publishing house in USA. And apart from that, Chandanji has also been the CEO of a media house in Mumbai, producing TV programs for India and abroad. He's also been the CEO for Sahara Samay News Network. Apart from the above, he ran his business operations by establishing offices in Mumbai, New Delhi, Chandigarh, Kolkata, Pune, Bali, Addis Ababa, Boston, Moscow, Bamako, Conakry, etc. Currently, he's working on reforestation, digital education, women and child nutrition, poverty eradication, and sustainable development projects in various parts in the world, primarily in West Africa. And he's also provided leadership to many global events, including renowned personalities such as the Honorable former President APJ Abdul Kalam ji and former Prime Minister Shri Atal Bihari Vajpayee ji, our current Prime Minister Shri Narendra Modi ji at MIT Cambridge, Massachusetts, to commemorate India's 50th anniversary. He's also done global events for various US senators. Then Dr. Deepak Chopra, Miss Goldie Hawn, David Frawley, Swami Chinmayananda, Swami Dayanand Saraswati, and others. And he's organized over 100 conferences and seminars on Indian culture and heritage. A key organizer to Global Vision 2000 Youth Conference in 1993 in Washington, D.C. to commemorate Swami Vivekananda's centenary year celebration to his Chicago address. And he was also the key organizer to the first ever Global Dharma Conference in 2003 in America. He's been appointed as the chairman of the most prestigious Indian Chambers of Commerce, Indian American International Chambers of Commerce for West Africa region. He is also the Africa head of Global Indians for Bharat Vikas. He's also worked with students community in North America for over a decade doing events for youth and empowerment. He's a researcher on Indian history, especially on the Bengal Renaissance, specializing on Rajarshi Ram Mohan Roy, Rabindranath Tagore, Swami Vivekanand, and Sri Aurobindo. An internationalist, Chandan Bandyopadhyay ji, he enjoys a strong relationship with people across the globe. And entrepreneur, he has visited 50% countries, 50 plus countries, and lived in around 20 plus countries. So with that, I would also like to introduce our co-moderator, Smita Mukherjee ji. Everybody knows her. She's been a speaker on Sangam Talks, and she's a scholar in her own right. She was born in a Uttar Pradesh, a daughter of a defense officer, and she, from the earliest years, soaked in the culture and flavor of different regions of India. This imbibed in her a sense of oneness and deep attachment and reverence for all the constituent elements of India, in particular its history. And she went on to study history in university, and though she got sidetracked to other fields professionally, but history has been her abiding love. And by occupation, she is a management professional and a language specialist, and she is a mother to two wonderful young adults who share with her the same passion for history and a deep love of the motherland. You can read her writings at Ritambara. I would be sharing the video soon to introduce you about Bangla Abar, the co-organizer of this program. So, with that, Chandanji, can you speak about Bangla Abar a little bit before we move ahead? Chandanji, are you there?
Yeah, I
I
don't see
think,
him. I don't see
yeah,
him.
Chandanda is not there.
Neither
And
Smita is not there either.
yes, Smith, yeah, I've
No.
added Smita ji to it. And Professor Amia Sen is there, and Professor Bruce Carlyle Robertson. So, Kanchanda, I'll share the video in just a short while. There's some technicalities come up about Bangla Abar. But can we move on to Professor Bruce Carlyle Robertson for his talk, and then we can move on to the others?
Yes.
I welcome you, Professor Robertson.
And unfortunately, for technical reason, his video is not working, so he's speaking only through phone.
Well, you're not missing anything by not seeing me here. I hope the voice is clear. I have, this is an honor to be in a part of this symposium, and I'm sorry to be such a spoiler here. I have.
That's okay, Professor Robertson. We are getting to hear you. I think that is more than enough. But we would like you to begin your address to our audience. Thank you.
Okay, good. Well, Raja Raman has been a subject of great interest to me since graduate school. I have done my research in both European libraries and American and the Calcutta Library. I spent a couple of months in Calcutta laying the groundwork for my books. Why I was so taken with, as a graduate student, you have to do a dissertation, you have to do a thesis. And I was at Oxford at the time, so that was the major share of my study there. But what attracted me to Raja Rammohan was his compassion, his
We seem to have lost.
works in Bengali. I don't speak it, but I can read it, and or I should better use the word decipher. Very conscious of caste rules and that whole set of issues. And what attracted me is that one day he was walking along the road in Calcutta, and being a very high caste Brahmin, he saw a coolie struggling with a burden, and he stopped, went over and helped the coolie pick up the load and helped him carry it. And this absolutely shocked his friends. It shocked the people around him who knew him. And he was from that point, I think the person I wanted to do a dissertation on. So I have published a couple of books, published with Oxford University Press, which are dated now, and I have another book that's coming off the press. Updates the work that's been done on him and includes that. But what struck me so much about him was his willingness to cross boundaries, all cultural boundaries, caste boundaries. He became a very fluent in English. Had lots of European friends. Supported. He was all over the place in a very interesting ways. To use a Americanism, all over the place, meaning it's hard to limit to a particular category. But he his deepest concern, as everybody knows, and you all know this as better than I do, but he began to really develop his worldview when he saw how abysmally treated women were. He was very fond of his sister-in-law. His oldest brother, Jagmohan, had a sister-in-law who basically took care of him, who was his babysitter, as we would say in this country. And he developed this deep affection for her, and he couldn't explain or justify the treatment of women when they were such caregivers. And the issue that that turned the whole issue around for him was the sati of his oldest brother's wife, who had been so much of his babysitter basically all through life. He was absolutely heartbroken. This was a catastrophic issue in his life, and at that point he decided that this was not, as everybody said, as the cultures at that time of his class, this was just plain murder. He says there's no excuse for this. This isn't a suicide. Well, it wasn't suicide in many cases. He said, and so he put his foot down and started a campaign to eradicate sati. And he did it basically by going back to the Shastras, the Vedas, looking for scriptural authority that would sanction sati. And he found none. And he said this. And he paid the consequences. His life was in danger at some point, and there are stories that he had to have a bodyguard to protect him. He never was in his lifetime accused of trying to become a Christian or a Europeanized in any way. He changed the European point of view on these issues, and these thoughts basically provided me with a subject matter for a thesis. And I wrote my first book, Raja Ram Mohan Roy, The Father of Modern India, was later published. I left Oxford, finished my PhD at the University of Pennsylvania, but I basically wrote this book on the basis of all the discussions and research that I did in Kolkata. I owe everything to the good humor and the expertise of my colleagues at Calcutta University, and so I'm basically the editor of a lot of people's thoughts. Now, I don't know what else I need you want me to talk about, but I think that he was the bridge between Western culture and Indian culture. He realized that he supported the Baptist missionaries because he thought that their educational system was better than anybody else's. He was never close to converting. I was reading somewhere recently that the author said he converted and became a Christian, and I wrote in the margins of that, absolute nonsense. He didn't realize that was not what he was drawn to. He was really, in effect, the first person to study religions comparatively. So I would say that he really basically invented the study of comparative religion. And that was an achievement that has had huge consequences and repercussions throughout the educational world. You had departments of religion that were really not religion in general, but religion in general. Now, I don't want to keep going on and on here because I'd rather listen to what other people are saying. I'm very honored to be on the podium, so to speak, right now. I've got Dilip Kumar Biswas's correspondence of Raja Rammohan in front of me, and Ram Mohan Roy, other text in my books, and the one that's in the process right now. But anyway, I will subside and take any questions or anything else that needs to be done. Thank you for this invitation. I'm very honored to be speaking to you.
Thank you so much, Professor Robertson. And I'll quickly play the video of Bangla Abar before we move on to our next panelist. So just give me a moment before I move on to the next panelist. I'll play the video.
From Kanchan Banerjee in Boston, America. I am a founder and the international convener for the Bangla Abar, a platform to promote awareness about Bengal's heritage, history, and culture. I'm so thankful to Sangam Talks for organizing this series of discussions and talks with scholars and experts from around the world on the luminaries of Bengal who has significantly contributed in the development of modern India. So I'm looking forward to this series, and I hope same with you. Thank you for joining, and namaskar.
Namaskar.
So that was Sri Kanchan Bandhopadhyay ji. He is the founder of Bangla Abar, our co-organizer, and do check out their content. It is very, very important. So thank you, Kanchanda. And Kanchan Bandhopadhyay ji is a thinker, researcher, author, and social leader. He was born in a small village of West Bengal, and where he had first-hand experiences of the communist movements and Naxalism. Later, he moved to USA to study computer science, and as it happens with anybody living far away from his or her native place, also feels a deeper connection to the roots. So from far, Kanchanda could see India in a different light, the India of the past, the invaded, colonized, yet survived along with its cultural history and heritage. So Kanchan Bandhopadhyay ji started questioning many facts about India. He learned from textbooks in India and the West, and he's a globetrotter. He's an internationalist. He's the brother of Chandan Bandyopadhyay ji. I gave a whole, and he has been organizing immense global events with our Prime Minister Shri Narendra Modi ji there in USA, and many other world-renowned such names and celebrities and thinkers. He recently released a book, The Crash of a Civilization. It's there on Amazon. Please do check it out. We will also be doing a book launch with him on Sangam Talk soon. With that, thank you so much. That was a short introduction to Bangla Abar, our co-organizer. Now I would like to move on to Smita ji. Shall we move on to Professor Amiya Sen ji directly? Yes. Okay. So we'll move on to Professor Amiya P. Sen. Professor Amiya P. Sen ji, we welcome you. Namaste. Please start your address.
Okay. I thank the organizers heartily for having me here on the show. It was a pleasure also to hear Bruce speak. I haven't heard him in the last 20 years. I was one of the great admirers of his first book. I still haven't seen the second. I hear it's about to be out, published. So great to be in touch with Bruce again, and thank you for connecting us. Now, we are a little short of time, and it is also my habit to not to dilate on things, but to present them in short, intelligible points, which is exactly what I shall do this evening. I'm going to speak basically on two aspects of Ram Mohan, which are foundational, I think. One of them is the connection between Ram Mohan and Indian modernity. We often hear of the two being, uttered in the same breath, as it were. But I don't think it's been understood and debated to the extent it ought to have been debated. The other thing which I shall touch upon, again briefly, for the paucity of time, is the religious world of Ram Mohan. What were his religious views and his opinions? This is fundamental because, contrary to most thinkers and activists of that period, Ram Mohan considered religion to be the site of all change. In that sense, he was a bit like Gandhi, who sort of saw a connection between even politics and religion. But I'll come to that a little later. Let me start off by saying that any thought of speaking of Ram Mohan always excites me. So please have me in check if I exceed my time limit. I will consciously try not to do that. But my first point is this. Like any great man, Ram Mohan has been subject to contrary pulls and pressures. He's been glorified to the sky and he's been unreasonably debunked. I am appalled at the charges now being leveled against the man. I am no great admirer of Ram Mohan. There are things which one can speak critically in the context of Ram Mohan's life and work, but to debunk him for the wrong reasons, I think, is deplorable. And someone or some people who are right thinking ought to reply to these false and completely unfounded charges. I also think that to praise a man is better than debunk him, because that way you give him the benefit of doubt. It is easier to debunk a man than to praise him, and we can be a little more generous about the fact that Ram Mohan was indeed a very foundational figure in the history of modern India. Now, let me start off by mentioning a few points about Ram Mohan and modernity. Now, it's been a very common habit among us, especially Indians, to call Ram Mohan the father of modern India. Professor Robertson has authored a book on that theme. So, my question here is, have we pondered enough as to what the contents or the constituents of this modernity is? Why is he modern? And why is he the father of modern India? I think these are seminal questions which ought to be understood better. In my opinion, modernity has two aspects. One of them is located in history and time. It's about your historical location. You belong to a modern period or you don't belong to a modern period. This is an accident of birth. This is not something which we can shape. But there's also the other aspect, which is more humanly maneuvered and manipulated and controlled, which is to do with how we approach the question of modernity. What is our approach? What is our attitude? What is our orientation? So that is equally important sometimes. Now, as to the first point that I made about the timing, the historical location, this is very important. Had Ram Mohan been born even 100 years earlier, I don't think he would have been the man that he was eventually, because a lot of things changed in that period. And he was fortunate to have been born at the time that he was indeed born. So that is important. On the other hand, timing is not all, because not everybody who is born in the modern times think like a modern man. If that was so, Raman would have had no enemies, no opponents. He had a lot of them, as Professor Robertson was just hinting at. So a birth in a particular historical framework doesn't necessarily lead to modern ways of thinking. And that point has to be emphasized. Ram Mohan, I think, had a distinct advantage. And the advantage was that he was both born in a modern time, which is crucial, as I said, but he also was able to think like a modern man. His approach was modern. That is what really matters to me, because, as I said, just being born in the modern times is sometimes not enough. I want to underline this point that I'm about to say now. I think Ram Mohan was the first among Indians, modern Indians, to realize how crucial the engagement with the West was in the 18th, early 19th centuries. In my own researches, I've come across this very often. I want to sort of bring this up here. 19th century writings by Hindu thinkers and writers are full of one argument, which is this. I don't know if you've heard this at all, but I certainly have, which is this, that, the Muslims in 500 years of rule did not challenge us the way the British have in just about 50 years. In other words, what the Hindus are saying, Hindus of the 19th century are saying, that the Indo-Islamic rule did not really pose an intellectual, moral, or other kind of challenges to the Hindu mind, which the British did. That this is something which we need to understand. And I think Ram Mohan was the first person to realize the gravity of the intellectual engagement, the historical engagement between India and the modern West. He inherited, I think, at least three major historical events. The values coming from those three historical events, major historical events, I can name them quickly: the Renaissance, the Reformation, and the Enlightenment. He was an intellectual inheritor of all these three movements in one way or the other. And in his own lifetime, he witnessed two more revolutions. One, the American Revolution, and the other, the French Revolution. And both had an impact on his mind. So there is this accident of birth which favors Ram Mohan. But as I've been saying, it is not enough to be born in a certain time. It is also equally important that you try to capitalize and understand what the historical significance of something is. I'm sure that not many would have understood these revolutions in the way Ram Mohan did. This brings us to the key question. What then were the components of his modernity? Why do we call him modern? As I said, modernity, as I understand it, has to be a positive confluence between a historical location and a mental approach. And as I said, Ram Mohan had both these in him. But objectively speaking, as a historian, I think there were three things in his repertoire, in his thought, in his work, in his life, that made him very distinguishably modern. First of all, Ramon, I think, was the first man to distinguish between humanism and humanitarianism. Now, I suspect people don't recognize the distinction between the two, not enough at least. Humanitarianism is what we call Manavtavad in Hindi, also in Bangla, a compassion. There was a Karuna in Buddha, and there was compassion in many other religious and saintly figures. This is humanitarianism. Humanism, I submit, is quite different. Humanism, of course, is related to a sense of fellowship with human beings, but it is more than that. It is a philosophy, a worldview, which believes that everything has to be man centered. Man must be the measure of things, not anything else. And with that comes two more things, which I think was crucially important in the life and work of Ram Mohan. One, that, and I will take up about 2 or 3 minutes to explain this a little bit because not everybody has heard about it. Ram Mohan's philosophy was what I would call deistic. This is based upon a movement of the 18th century in Europe, West Europe, called deism. And what did it say? It said that after God created the world, he forgot all about it and left the charge to man. That made man morally responsible for the upkeep and the improvement of the world. There's a beautiful analogy given by an English deist called William Paley, and I often quote this in order to communicate what I'm trying to say. He said, look, after the watchmaker has made the watch, he simply forgets about it. Beyond that point in time, it is the wearer of the watch that has to take care of the watch, not the watchmaker. So God, having created the world, didn't want to bother about it anymore. He left the charge to man. So man becomes morally and intellectually responsible for the maintenance, upkeep, and progress of the world. Ram Mohan, in my mind, was a very thorough deist in this sense. And they believed that human intervention in the world mattered, which is why I often associate him with one important Sanskrit concept. It's called pravritti, engagement with the world, not nivritti, which is the opposite, which is detachment, vairagya. Ram Mohan was a man of pravritti, an active engagement with the world with a view to improve it, with a view to make it more habitable for man. So it all comes down from that single point, the point about humanism, which begins with the Renaissance and finds its fruition, I think, with the Enlightenment. There is a continuous history of developing this idea in West Europe between the 16th and the 18th centuries, of which Ram Mohan was a great beneficiary. But benefiting from something doesn't come automatically. One has to work towards it. Ram Mohan worked towards it. The other important key element in modernity, I find, is to see the interconnectedness between various aspects of human life rather than compartmentalize them. For instance, Ram Mohan, I think, was the first person to see a positive connection between social and religious things. I can give you more illustrations of this, but he categorically and consistently said that religion is not autonomous of society. It is a part of society. Religion will affect society, and society in turn will also affect religion. So the interconnection between the two is a very modern way of looking at things. And Ram Mohan certainly did that, to my mind. The third interesting component of modernity is the tendency to go by fixed identities. To say that something must have a fixed identity, which makes it recognizable. This is the idea behind, the very idea behind the British Indian census, which begins in the 1870s. somebody has to declare whether he is a Hindu or a non-Hindu, categorically. Now, this is very beneficial at times to sort of work out government policies and so on. But this is, and this is the point that I want to submit here, this was traditionally not the way of Indian thinking. I mean, if in the 18th century you asked a Vaishnav if he was a Vaishnav or a Hindu, he would be very confounded. Because we didn't see religion in that manner. We didn't see things in that kind of perspective. For us, things were interconnected. Ram Mohan, as I think a person who reflected modern thought, belongs to another category where labels become important, identities become important. Why else do you think, and I want to bring this up here, why else do you think Ram Mohan was the first Indian in 1816 to coin the term Hinduism? I am pretty sure that he knew that there was no such thing as Hinduism. If you read the writings of Bonkim, he very clearly says that this is a very loose connection of mostly ideas and beliefs and practices and so on. There really was nothing called Hinduism. And yet Ram Mohan uses the term. He's not the first to do so. He's the first Indian to do so. And there is a certain purpose behind it, which I shall only briefly touch upon because I think we are really pushed for time. This will need an entire lecture by itself. But there are certain political and other ramifications, social ramifications, for his choosing to use the word Hinduism for the religion of all Hindus, knowing fully well that this was not actually true. Hinduism was much too diverse to be subsumed under a single label. Raman very well knew that, and yet he encourages that idea. This must be understood in its right perspective. Let me now come to religion. Allow me a sip of water.
Professor Sen, we don't have any shortage of time. I would request that you can take the time you want, no problem.
No, but I don't want to exceed my brief either. I mean, Professor Robertson spoke so briefly, I was a little disappointed. I was hoping to hear him more. Anyway, about religion and Ram Mohan, as I said, a very key element of his life was religion. I say this because of the very interesting fact that the other great reformer from Bengal, especially we're talking about Bengal luminaries here, the other great reformer from Bengal, Vidyasagar, was the very opposite of Ram Mohan in this respect. He had absolutely no interest in religion. He didn't do the ritual acts that was required of a Brahmin, and he was beaten up by his father when he was a student for not doing them. People call him an agnostic and an atheist and so on. But what is interesting for me is that in this respect at least, I mean, Vidyasagar was as much an activist and reformer like Ram Mohan. He had many points in common. He had the woman's interest in mind. That is another common point. But in the matter of religion, he was very, very radically different. Why? I don't know. I mean, people are born in different ways and they act in different ways. We must try and understand why they do so, but that's a different issue for some other day. Okay. I think Ram Mohan is a very confusing person, at least to me. And I also suspect he was confused himself. I'm sorry to say this, but this is what appears to me from a very close study of his thoughts and writings. Why he was confused, I can understand. I can't explain this in detail, but his confusion came from trying to do too much, I think. Trying to sort of wear many hats, as it were. Now, I'm going to list here, in order to save time and so on, certain contradictions and problems in his thought, which is not what you expect any textbook to deal with. I mean, either they are debunking him or they are glorifying him. They don't seriously sort of go into the question of what these tensions are within his thought and acts. First tension, and Professor Robertson will bear me out here, because I really am indebted to him for this idea in a way. For his first book, Ramohun consistently denied that he was a modern man. The word he uses is Adhunik. Adhunik means modern. He denied being an innovator in any way. And I think, if you permit me this speculation, I think this connects with the Hindu idea that nothing comes out of nothing. Now, please try and understand. What the Hindus believed in is that everything has a prehistory. So if Rammohun is acting along those lines, he would have said that, look, I am only repeating an old thing, maybe in a different form, but I'm not being an innovator. I'm not saying a new thing. This is the word he consistently uses. I am not an Adhunik. But the problem is that despite denying being an Adhunik, an innovator, and a modern man, Ramon said some completely astonishing, unprecedented things, which not only make him an innovator, but a radical one as an innovator. First of all, what are these startling innovations or radical things that he said? Again, these are framed on his religious thought and acts, so I'll try and list them quickly without elaborating on them because of the time factor here. Number one, Ramon is the first man in the history of Hinduism. I'm using the word Hinduism as a shorthand for the sake of convenience. I know there are problems with the use of that word, but it's sometimes convenient to use it. We often do that with many other words. In the history of Hinduism, Ramon is the first Hindu, to try and translate the Shruti. The Shruti means the Vedas, the Upanishads, the canon, the Hindu canon. Now, these were not only not written down, they were orally transmitted, and therefore you won't find them in manuscripts until about late medieval periods, when they might have been sort of transcribed into manuscripts in certain regions of India. But basically, even down today in South India, there are Vedic Brahmins who know the entire Vedas by heart and can recite it before you. That was the original tradition. It's an oral tradition. Now, what Rammohun does is to completely radicalize this by making it into a textual tradition. How does he do it? By translating it, by publishing it, and publicizing it. He translated the Brahma Sutras, which is a kind of aphoristic collection of Upanishadic Mahavakyas, great sayings, and the key text in Hindu philosophy, and 5 Upanishads. The astonishing thing here further is that he not only translated them into Bangla, which is a vernacular, and sometimes in Hindi, 1 or 2 in Hindi. I think he translated the Gita into Hindi, which has not been found here. But the most astonishing thing here is that he also translated them into a Mleccha language like English. I have often told this to my friends that had Rammohun lived even 100 to 150 years earlier, he would have been murdered publicly for doing so. I think the British rule and the British law and order system, the rule of law, probably saved his life. This is an astonishing and unheard of. The Brahmins must have, lost their consciousness on seeing that the Shruti was now selling on the streets of Calcutta. He said another thing which is astonishing, not only astonishing, very radical for his times, which is this, that he tried to usher what I loosely call a religious democracy. What did he say? He said, look, hitherto the Shruti or the canon has been restricted to the Brahmin male. Remember, not any other male, only the Brahmin male had the prerogative of reading and interpreting the Shruti. He says now that the Shruti should be made accessible to the Shudras and to women, which were traditionally the two classes absolutely debarred from Shruti. There is this injunction from Manu which says that if a Shudra hears the Vedas being uttered somehow, even distantly, molten lead has to be poured into his ears. So you can imagine the implications of what Ramohn is saying in the 1820s or so. The second contradiction, again, which I've never understood, and I'd be very happy if somebody in the audience explains this to me. Ramohn called himself an Advaitin, that is a follower of Shankara Vedanta, which is Advaita Vedanta. But he said things which are completely anti-Shankara, like allowing the Shudras and women access to Vedas. Shankara would have turned in his grave to hear that. Right? And how does he do that? I never understood, because it is not as though people did not differ from Shankara. In the late medieval ages, after the 9th or 10th centuries, a lot of people, a lot of theoreticians and philosophers differed from him. Ramanuja, Madhva, Nimbarka, Bhaskara, Vallabha, they all differed and founded their own schools. Oh, that is understandable. But the tragedy or the irony or the paradox, whatever you may choose to call, with Ramohn is that he situates himself in the legacy of Shankara and yet says the most un-Shankara-like things. How is that possible? What did people say to that? Is that one of the reasons for his unpopularity? I wonder. As I just said a little while back, Ramohn was the first Indian to use the word Hinduism to denote the religion of the Hindus. And as I said, this is an omnibus, umbrella-like term which conceals many contradictions underneath. Ramohn was, I'm sure, pretty well aware of that. Why did he do that? Apart from the point that I made a little back about his trying to sort of come to a fixed label about things. If you are a Hindu, you must be practicing Hinduism. You can't possibly follow any other religion. So all Hindus in India have to be bracketed as followers of Hinduism. This is what Ramohn is saying by implication. Why did he say that? I don't think he said it for a religious purpose, because in religious terms, he could not have defended this argument. Down to the early 19th century, at the Kumbh Mela, Hindus were fighting each other over the right to take the first dip in the Ganges. Naga sannyasis murdered fellow Hindus on this very ground. So how is Hinduism the religion of all Hindus? There was very deeply rooted sectarianism and rivalries, which nobody could have lost sight of. So the question that stares us in the face is, why did Ramohn still proceed to use that word? I think it did it for a political purpose. And the political purpose being that if the Hindus are united religiously, there's a better chance of their uniting politically. That is how I see it. I'm not elaborating on this because this is worth a separate lecture by itself. I also think that there is a very clever choice. I may sound a little cynical here, but I think there's an element of very clever choice in choosing Advaita. Because Advaita is monistic. What is monism? It means that there's a single reality in everything. Advaita, in other words, philosophical Advaita, is very easily translatable into political unity, cultural unity. And I think Ramohn was aiming at that. He didn't say it, of course, but as a historian, this is how I read his intentions. There's another problem which is associated with his choosing Vedanta or Advaita Vedanta, whatever you may choose to call it, which is this, that both Ram Mohan and after him Vivekananda tended to call Vedanta or Advaita Vedanta the summit of Hindu thought. Let me again say here that this is untypically Hindu. Hinduism was always an orthopraxy, not an orthodoxy, which is to say that the Hindus never insisted on doctrinal conformity. They insisted far more on social conformity, which in plain terms mean that as long as you are following your caste rules and questions of purity and pollution, it doesn't really matter whether you follow this religion or that. Doctrinal conformity was never important for Hinduism. And let me also add here that the Hindus never, and this is a wonderful thing, I still have to understand it more fully, the Hindus never tried to define themselves against any other religions. You will notice that in medieval hagiographies, if you've seen any, the invaders are called Turks or Pathans or Afghans. They're not called Muslims, by the way. Please bear this out. They are not labeled or classified as belonging to a different religion. They are known by their ethnicities. Where do they come from? I know this for a fact because I've read a lot of medieval hagiographies and they all speak in this manner. They don't talk about Muslims beyond a point. So Ram Mohan, by choosing Vedanta as a summit of all Hindu thought, was trying to convert, in a way, a Hindu orthodoxy as orthopraxy into Hindu orthodoxy, which, as I said, is not typically a Hindu way of thinking. Again, this has a political resonance, and one must understand it that way. My next point. Technically, Ram Mohan was not even a qualified Vedantin. People don't highlight this sufficiently, but technically speaking, he could not have called himself a Vedantin because in order to be called a Vedantin, you had to comment on three important texts. One, the Brahma Sutra or Vedanta Sutra, Upanishads, chosen Upanishads. Shankara commented on 10, Ram Mohan commented only 5. There's no hard and fast rule about that. But Upanishads must be commented on. And third, the Gita. Now, Ram Mohan never commented on the Gita. So if you asked a typical traditional Vedantin of his time as to whether Ram Mohan was a qualified Vedantin, they would have categorically said no. Ram Mohan translated the Gita into Hindi, which, as I said, has not been found yet, but we do know that he did. But he never commented on the Gita. You look at any other important medieval theologian or philosopher, ranging from Shankara down to Vallabhacharya, they've all commented on all three texts: the Vedanta Sutra, Upanishads, chosen Upanishads, and the Gita. And which is exactly where they differ from one another, according to their way of thinking, which is understandable. My next point, point of contradiction. If, as Ram Mohan says repeatedly, that I am a Shankara Vedantin, he's contradicting himself in the sense that Shankara was not a monotheist. Shankara was a monist, which is, as I said, a philosopher who looks at everything as belonging to one substratum of reality. There's only one reality, which is Brahman. Monotheism is a worship of one God. You look at all the writings of Ram Mohan, they point towards monotheism. They point towards the rejection of idolatry, the rejection of image worship, the rejection of polytheism, worship of many gods and goddesses. But they're all theistic. Frankly speaking, Shankara was not a theist. Those who know enough philosophy will wear me out. Shankara is primarily a philosopher. He is not a theist. This reminds me of the very interesting incident involving Vivekananda. After Vivekananda set up the Mayavati ashram in the 1890s, after he had come back from the West, he found that his fellow brother monks were worshipping worshipping Ramakrishna in pictorial forms in the Mayavati ashram. Vivekananda was aghast. He said, nothing doing. Vedanta cannot allow this. You're being unvedantic. And he even got Sharda Devi, who was Ramakrishna's wife, to endorse his view. So this is typical Advaita Vedanta. It has no place for gods and goddesses. It has no place for theism. Ram Mohan basically is a monotheist, as against a polytheist. All his writings bear that out. And one of his missions really was to establish monotheism in India, back in India, for which he turned to Upanishads and other texts. Am I running short of time? Okay, I'll quickly make a couple of points more and then I'll end. Number one.
Yes, Professor. Please take your time.
Okay, fine, thank you. There is this theory which has developed, especially since the writings of Professor Dermot Killingly, who was a scholar based in England. I've read his book with great admiration and I benefited from him. One of his theories is that Ram Mohan modernized Vedanta, which I am now inclined to dispute for two reasons. Number one, and I am saying this in extremely brief ways. Number one, Vedanta is basically a moksha shastra. It's a theory of liberation, how to liberate yourself, the liberation of the self. It has nothing to do with modernization. It's a transcendental philosophy. It has no roots in empirical living world. Shankara therefore uses two terms simultaneously. He uses the word paramarthik, which is spiritual, transcendental, which is what Vedanta is. It's moksha shastra. And the vyavaharik, the everyday world. Shankara never mixes up the two. Ram Mohan tried to do that, and I think I'll touch upon that very briefly. My greatest complaint against Ram Mohan, I'm not a formidable scholar or philosopher to make objections like this, but it does strike me as odd that Ram Mohan adopted or reveals a very instrumentalist view of religion. In 1829 or 28, I forget which, he writes to an English friend of his called Digby, who was also his boss at some point in time, that religion is fine, provided, and I quote him here, these are his exact words, provided they provide you political advantage and social comfort. Now, this is a typically utilitarian view of religion. Vedanta could not have been that. They are poles apart, utility and Vedanta, utility and moksha, transcendentalism. So, how does Ram Mohan say that religion is about securing political advantage and social comfort? Here, he is not speaking as a religious figure, he's speaking more like a secular figure. But he makes the point in the context of religion, which is very, very surprising. And this is linked to another point, which I must briefly, very briefly dwell upon. The problem with Ram Mohan, and maybe this is my last point here, the problem with Ram Mohan is this, Ram Mohan's view of religion is this, that he grants a creator God. God created the world. So he says, and this is his terminology, he says, I recognize what is called the Tatastha Lakshana, which is that there is a God who created the world. But what this God is like, what his Swarupa is the term which means nature. You can't define the Swarupa of God. Now, this is understandable. It's not easy to define who or what God is and what his nature is and so on. But the problem here is this, that religion cannot stop at simply admitting a creator God. Religion has to go much beyond. It is about emotions. It's about piety. It's about sentiments. It's about prayer. So, unless you have some idea of God, unless you, for example, let's say, unless you begin to love God and believe that there is the possibility of a bonding of love between God and man, how are you going to determine God? How are you going to follow any religion at all? That's not really, that's more philosophy than religion. If you admit only, I mean, it's metaphysics that God created the world and left it as it is, and then a man takes it up and so on. Religion is a living, organic, something based on human sentiment, human feeling, human emotion. I don't think Ramon got to that. But what's the last contradiction here? And this is a great contradiction, and maybe not so known to many people here, perhaps. You've got to look at Ram Mohan's songs, which are called Brahma Sangeet, and they are sung even today in Brahma Samaj. There are two notable distinctions about Brahma Sangeet. One, that very surprisingly, they talk about a personal God. It's as if Ram Mohan is addressing a personal God, which no Vedantic can. And even his texts, his readings of Upanishads don't allow that. Secondly, being such a positive-minded activist, engaged with the world and so on, Ram talks very depressingly about the world. The world is ephemeral, it's not going to stay forever. God is real. We must all die someday. Man has to, it's almost like the Buddha's revelation. Man has to turn old and infirm and sick. He'll be sick someday, and our ultimate fate is death. So this I found very contradictory and against the general run of his sentiments and arguments, which he makes otherwise. I think I'll end there, and maybe there will be a few questions.
Thank you so much, Professor Amiya P. Sen, for that wonderful, enlightening session. And I think before I move on to Smita ji, I would like to just get in Chandan Bandyopadhyay ji for a few words. Chandanda, are you there? Okay, I think Chandanda, he would be back, but we'll move on to our co-moderator for the day, Smita ji. She's been our speaker, and we have learned so much from her. Smita ji, welcome. Smita ji, you'll have to unmute yourself. You're on mute. Yeah.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Tanya. Thank you so much. Thank you, Professor Robertson, Professor Sain, for being here and honoring, gracing this occasion. And thank you for the deep insights, particularly analyzing the religious points of view. This almost makes any question regarding the superficial manner in which a lot of the common discourse runs makes it almost unnecessary. However, one aspect of Ram Mohan has been that he has been, even in his lifetime, he caused quite a few ruffled feathers. And because he was ahead of his time in some ways, particularly when we consider his ideas of modernity. In later portrayals, the personality was molded according to the various agendas. Some called him a great social reformer, the crusader against sati, others as an innovator or a disruptor of established tradition, and even a class representative of the landed gentry in some Marxist writings. And there are still others that accuse him of being an ally of the colonial powers. And the last one of these characterizations is very popular in the political right, which has grown more clamorous with the coming of social media. And I would like to draw in both the experts into a discussion on some of these misapprehensions and gaps in information about Ram Mohan Roy, which has led to a caricaturing of the personality in the recent discourse. Uh, while in this very historically ignorant but highly suspicious popular imagination, personalities like Roy are examples of the false icons foisted upon a long wronged Hindu people by a dominant cabal of the leftist academicians and the westernized education system. It's a very typical post colonial psychology that seeks to mark quislings and stone them. And misconceptions and misrepresentations are rife. But their fondest delusion is that there was never anything wrong with the way Hinduism was practiced, and that the entire idea of reformation was a conspiracy of the evangelists and the native collaborators of the British against their Hindu religion. So, while there is no merit really to this rabble, it makes sense to address some of these claims, which I look to do. And one of these has been very persistent, that Ram Mohan Roy had converted to Unitarian Christianity. And we do read about Ram Mohan Roy as a self-confessed Unitarian. So, my first question to the experts would be that what is Unitarianism? What was its origin and its placement within Christianity, and how did Ram Mohan Roy understand it? What was his purpose in helping the Unitarians anchor themselves in India? When we look particularly seen from his political perspective, uh, that he always uh, viewed the utility of religion from the political and social perspective. Would Dr. Robertson or Dr. Sain?
I think this is Professor Robertson area, really. So,
Can you repeat the question? Like, what is Unitarianism and what was the relationship?
Yeah, I mean, what exactly? I mean, how was Unitarianism placed within Christianity, and how did Ram Mohan Roy understand it? What was his purpose in helping the Unitarians anchor themselves in India?
again, you see, I mean, if you permit my answering here,
Please do, sir.
speaking on Unitarianism will require at least 30 to 40 minutes. So let's not go into that. I think the more relevant aspect is, was Ram Mohan a person who was switching from Hinduism to Christianity through Unitarianism? Is that historically
Correct.
tenable?
Yes.
I think we got to. This is Robertson again. I think we got to look at it from another angle, and that is that he was the only people that came to his rescue were Unitarians. He didn't espouse Unitarianism at all. I mean, they that took some of the heat off of him. He was desperate for allies. He did not claim to be Unitarian at all. I find no evidence of that. The Unitarians were thought he was their theologian. They were the ones pushing it. They were the ones who saying, "Oh, he's one of us." He never said that. And I was looking through my table of contents of several books, and I did not find any reference to him using the word Hinduism, and even he refers to Hindu Dharma. but he does not use the word Hinduism that I know of. It's possible that I've overlooked something, but he did not claim to be a Unitarian. He did, however, look at them as fellow searchers after truth, and that's the perspective that I take on this issue. It's arguable, I admit.
Okay, could I briefly add to that?
Please do, sir. Please do.
I think there's no doubt about the fact that Ramon and William Adam formed the Calcutta Unitarian Society in 1821. Ramon was an active partner in that. From that position, they changed to the Brahmo Sabha, the Atmani Sabha a little later, but that's a different story. So Ramon was indeed drawn to Unitarianism, which has two aspects. One, a dogmatic, doctrinal aspect, and the other, a social aspect. Both attracted Ramon. He found a kind of congeniality between the theory that instead of three components to Christianity, the God, Son of God, and the Holy Ghost, there should be only one. That corresponded, in his opinion and in his mind, to monotheism, Hindu monotheism. So he was trying to see an equivalence between Unitarianism rather than Trinitarianism and Hindu monotheism. The Trinitarianism would be more like, say, the Brahma, Vishnu, Maheshwar kind of thing, which is idolatrous, which Rammohn wanted to avoid. And as we all know, Rammohn was vitriolic in his attacks on Puranic religion. I mean, he abused no less a man than Chaitanya and others and he also abused Krishna. At one place he says, even the person who works at my house as a servant wouldn't have done the kind of petty acts of stealing that Krishna does. He says that. This is on record. So the doctrinal, dogmatic aspects is, I think, a matter of seeking equivalence between Hindu monotheism and a unitary view of Christianity, not a Trinitarian view of Christianity. And William Adam was a Baptist in his early life. He abandoned the Baptists in Srirampur, came and joined over with Rammohn in forming the Calcutta Unitarian Society. And the Baptists got so angry with that they called him the second fallen Adam. Right? So there is the substantial history of the Calcutta Unitarian Society. It didn't last very long, but it is there. The other aspect which I want to highlight and which certainly attracted Rammohn is the social gospel of Unitarianism. If you look at the history of Unitarianism in Europe and in America, they were all drawn into social work. Prison reform, education, working for women, that attracted Rammohn. You see, in the pre-Marxian days and in Rammohn's British India, for Rammohn, the women were the proletariat, really, not the laboring classes. There were no laboring classes. The women were the proletariat. He wanted to reform. And that bit about the social gospel of Unitarianism impressed him very much. And if the American and British Unitarians found him so congenial and homely and attractive, they also did that for the same reason. That Rammohn was espousing both monotheism and the social gospel of religion. The religions have to be responsible. This is the point that I want to underline. Both Unitarians and Rammohn wanted to underline the point that religion has to be socially responsible. It's not about escaping another world.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Robertson, Dr. Sen. There's another question.
I just want to say one thing.
Yes, please, Dr. Robertson. Yeah, please.
Please go ahead.
Yes, sir. Please continue.
Just looking, if you look at Sophia Dobson Collett's biography, which is the earliest and probably the best biography of Rama.
Not the earliest.
The earliest English version.
No, not even that. Not even that.
What is the earliest?
Kishori Chand Mitra's biographical sketch.
Okay, all right. You're correct. But this is the one that really sort of got the attention of the world on Ram Mohan Roy, if I'm not mistaken. But I've lost my train of thought now. But,
Sorry, I'm so sorry.
No. If it was that, it wasn't worth repeating. Then you helped out here. No, I think that the tradition has been, and my point, I think, is that Collett really created a lot of who was a Unitarian. Really shaped a lot of opinions on Ram Mohan Roy. She's absolutely starstruck by him, but she is quick to show how his ideas were similar to Unitarians' ideas. That has pretty much, I think, shaped until recently the perspective on Ram Mohan. I challenge this in the book that's coming out now, published by Routledge. I've got a new biography coming out, which I'm very anxious to see what the critics have to say.
Professor Robertson, I would seriously recommend that you have a look at Mary and Land Carpenter's work, which precede Collett's work. They were earlier Unitarians. They were earlier Unitarians and associated with Ram Mohan much more deeply, personally.
Yeah, well, by then the Unitarians were trumpeting him as their theologian.
Yeah,
they really pushed that whole story. Ram Mohan was one of us.
Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Robertson, Dr. Sen.
I have a bad connection.
We are able to hear you.
We can hear you.
We can hear you.
I'm having background noise from your end there.
That's okay. So, yeah.
Okay,
So
I'll just address one question to Dr. Sen in the meanwhile. There is this much quoted letter from Ram Mohan Roy to the Governor General Lord Amherst, in which he makes a very strong case for teaching of Western material sciences, modern political thought, and the arts in preference to native system, which he seems to consider redundant. His view also came to be quoted in the context of the Orientalist versus Anglicist debate on education in the parliament. And this is seen by casual commentators as nailing proof of Ram Mohan's culpability in the demise of the wanted traditional education system and driving Sanskrit to extinction, famously from one very well-known commentator. Now, was Roy really this improvident advocate of westernization of education? And what really was his vision and his individual contribution towards education and in bringing out Sanskrit, native languages, as well as the sciences? So what was exactly he advocating? What was his vision?
Oh, that's addressed to me, is it?
Yes, sir.
Okay. 2 or 3 things quickly. Number one, Ram Mohan was very consciously advocating the judicious, and let me emphasize the word here, the judicious spending of public money in the right kind of education. You see, the East India Company's coffers were rather poor, and they were not willing to invest money beyond a point. And Rammohan's point in that letter to Amherst is really this, that why spend precious government official money in propagating something which is already being propagated, please underline this, which is already being propagated in the native schools of India, in the Tols and Chatushpathis. What new things will you teach? Why not teach something which the Pandits cannot teach, which only you can teach? Modern sciences and technology and language and philosophy coming from the West. That's the point number one. Now, point number two, contrary to what people may think, Rammohan personally opened a Vedanta college in 1822. So he wasn't opposed to native learning, as it were. He simply felt that it was injudicious use of public money to fund native education. Again, he's being a utilitarian here, and he's trying to make the maximum that he can from limited public resources. So native education can be still left to Pandits. What they cannot do, the East India Company can now do. It is another matter that Amherst didn't listen to him, and in 1824, the Sanskrit College was opened in Calcutta with the intention of promoting Sanskrit education. But this is understandable because in 1820s, India was very much under the spell of Orientalists. Very much, ideologically, intellectually, and so on. So this is not surprising at all. So I wanted to emphasize this point, that people mistakenly think that Raman was opposed to Indian native education. He simply thought that this could be carried out in another way. Let me also end by bringing in another important personality involved in this whole question, which is Vidyasagar. Apart from Ram Mohan, Vidyasagar is the only person who is supposed to have opposed the teaching of Vedanta and Sankhya, which are two prominent schools of Vedanta and Sankhya, two prominent schools of Hindu philosophy. He wrote a letter to the government saying that, and I quote here, these are exactly his words, he says, these are false systems of philosophy. Ramon didn't say that. Vidyasagar had the guts to say that these are false systems of philosophy. And he then cites Bacon to say that what India is producing, I quote him again, is cobwebs of learning, within inverted commas, cobwebs of learning, scholasticism, which has practically no use for a modern day living. That is all I have to say.
Thank you, Dr. Sen. Dr. Robertson, want to add to that?
Beg your pardon?
Do you want to add something to
Would
that?
you like to add to that?
I'm not getting a very clear I'm not understanding a lot of what's being said because of the electronics. So I'm not sure exactly. Hard to follow the argument straight through. So it's kind of
no problem. I'll go to the next question. Dr. Robertson. This I wanted to actually address to you because this is flipping the perspective somewhat. And this is one fact which is less known in India is that Rammohan was very enthusiastically welcomed among all sections in Europe also, by commoners, by elites, the thinkers, religious figures, politically powerful people. Even after it became clear that he was neither the prized convert that they had hoped for, and nor was he going to be of any assistance in the missionary enterprise of converting Indians. So there was a definite spontaneity of sincere seekers, the majority of them, in fact, who warmed up to him and cherished their association and interactions with him. And he became a mascot somewhat of liberal, reformative, and humanitarian ideas among the British and the Americans. So, what value did the Christian world see in Ram Mohan Roy's works and words that it was even quoted and followed up so many years later, and especially by those who concern themselves with philosophy and theology and with reform? And what is the reason for this continued interest, even in the modern day, in Ram Mohan Roy for historians and writers of religion in the West?
Being difficult.
You're not able to hear?
Yeah,
Oh,
Professor.
no, he wasn't. He was never converted, and he wasn't trying to help the missionaries. I think he was remarkable in many respects, intellectually, but the sense of compassion that he had for was one of the most distinguishing characteristics. He thought the missionaries were doing a wonderful job in setting up schools. He didn't go along. He wasn't, and he supported that. And he was very much involved with the non-missionaries, the Europeans. Education, he thought, was absolutely the way to modernize India. By modernized, he meant get up with the times. And he thought that if they were going to compete economically, they must be able to compete politically as well. So he was hard to follow and easy to misunderstand, because he was in my view trying to accomplish several different outcomes that political on one end, religious on the other. He was never ever a convert to to Unitarianism, but he and certainly not to the Baptist traditions either. But he thought that religion, was politically very important. He needed the support of whomever he could get, and the Unitarians were right there behind him, and also the William Carey and Joshua Marshman. They were admirers of him, and it was hard to sort of put all of that into sort of see how all that worked itself out. But he was very education prone, very education centered, and he thought that was and the institutions he had to deal with were largely religious. Anyway, that. Oh, of course.
Yes, please continue.
In my view, absolutely not. They catered to him. He thought that if you want, he's dealing with a superpower, Britain, colonial Britain, and he was too smart to attack issue of front attack. He saw that there was so much the benefit that they brought with them: schools, a new sense of social justice, and all of these within the cloak of religion and culture. And so he wasn't going to throw the baby out with the bathwater, as the saying goes here. He said, "Look, we've got to acknowledge the good that they do, and the economic good that they do. They provide a link with international trade. The ships coming in and out of Calcutta Harbor were laden went out with Indian goods and came in with European goods. India was Calcutta, I should say Calcutta or Kolkata, was an international city with all the good and all the the conflicts that are part of being a real economic player in India, and we never can forget that. There was so much good that was being brought in by the missionaries and by Europeans, non-religious Europeans, and that's I think his one of his greatness. One of the things that made him such a remarkable person. He was known in America, Baltimore, Maryland. That's where I live. He was writing letters to Jared Sparks, who was the founder of the First Unitarian Church of Baltimore, the earliest Unitarian church in America, almost. And the letters that he wrote back and forth, Jared Sparks, who resigned the pastorate and became a lecturer at Harvard. Raja Rammohun was a remarkable guy. He got around. He was, and the Unitarians looked on him as a example of what they could do if they had if they could use his approach. These are controversial ideas, I know. I think that there's a room for discussion on everything that I've said.
Thank you, Dr. Robertson. Would Dr. Sen like to add to that about the value that the Western world saw in Rammohun Rao?
Well, very briefly,
Not coming clearly.
That's okay. So let Dr. Sen is responding now.
No, I'm going to be very brief here. I just add, if you're interested in that aspect, you should read Len Zastupil's work, who's actually examined the reception that Rammohun and Rammohun's work receives in contemporary Britain. It's a book full of details of that kind. But I'll just say this to summarize, that just as Rammohun found things to rejoice in Unitarianism, the Unitarians also found in Rammohun things which they were very happy to find in an Indian. I mean, after all, they were not acquainted with India and Indian culture, and they were impressed and sort of bewildered by the fact that, an Indian could sort of speak in languages which they were very familiar with. This exactly is the case with Keshab Sen when he visits England in 1870. I mean, even the Queen Victoria is highly impressed with the oratory of Keshab Sen. She never imagined that an Indian would be speaking this kind of English.
Yes, right. No, he shook up, to use an Americanism, he shook up a lot of people.
Yeah.
The Unitarians were, in my view, they basically adopted him as their theologian.
Mm.
They quoted him all the time, a lot. But he's never ceased to be controversial.
Oh, yes.
Thank you.
He's sorry.
Yes, please continue. There's a time lag. Sorry. Yeah, please continue, sir.
He certainly didn't convert to Unitarianism.
Yeah. Okay, so I think there is just time for one last question, which is also a little not controversial, but it's a little, people consider it a little problematic. I'll quote Monier Williams, who calls Rammohun the first earnest-minded investigator of the science of comparative religion. But precisely for this reason, Rammohun's interactions with Christianity and Islam are poorly understood and even suspiciously regarded by a great number of people in India as collusion with outsiders to corrupt or convert away Hindus. It is alleged that Roy was facilitating a Christianization of India by propagating a mishmash of Hindu, Christian, and Islamic ideas. So, what was the nature and purpose of Ramon's theological engagements, and what has been the impact and influence of the huge body of translations of various religious texts done by him, particularly to Mletsha language, as Dr. Sen said?
Again, our connection is terrible. I didn't get a lot of what you just asked.
So let Dr. Sen respond to
Would
it.
Dr. Sen
I will.
respond to it?
I'll repeat that question to Dr. Robertson privately.
Okay, I think the question is slightly off the mark in the sense that I personally don't think Ramon was the first person to experiment with comparative religion. I think that came much later. I would say Max Muller, if you ask me. What Ramon does is to experiment with the idea of a universal religion, universalism. This is different from comparative religion, you see. Comparative religion is an academic exercise. Ramon did not enter into that. In my view, again, I'm generalizing, but it's a critical generalization. There are three kinds of universalisms in the history of Hindu India and modern India. First kind belongs to Ram Mohan, which is the universalism of subtraction. That here are these religions, take away the excess baggage, the nonsensical parts of these religions, and you will be left with a core, which is exactly the same as in some other religion. So all religions, in other words, have a common core. And this is why I call this is the universalism of subtraction. There is a second kind of universalism which Keshav Sen practiced in his so-called Navavidhan, a new dispensation, which was to arbitrarily choose ideas and practices from various religions as if he was making up a bouquet of flowers, a very appealing kind of bouquet of flowers, but fragrant and all that. But these were randomly done. I mean, he's trying to fuse ideas and practices into one religion. That is the second kind of religion. And the third kind, to my mind, is the one practiced by Ramakrishna, which is neither the first nor the second, which says that religions do not have porous boundaries. Please mark my words. This is the first distinctive quality in Ramakrishna's saying, that you cannot swap one idea for another across religions. When he was practicing Islam as a part of his spiritual experimentation, he stopped going to the Kalibadi. Why? Because Islamic monotheism is inconsistent with the worship of Kali. So practice religion in its full spirit. You can't leave out anything, can't exclude anything. You have to accept religions in their totality. So this is, as I said, neither the religion of subtraction nor the religion of addition. It's eclecticism. Ramohan, I would say, is the religion of subtraction, Keshav Sen, the religion of addition, and Ram Krishna, the religion of eclecticism. It's not syncretic. I find a distinction between syncretism and eclecticism. I would call him eclectic. By the way, just to add a fact, Ramohan wrote a work in 1829 called The Universal Religion. Fortunately or unfortunately, that work is almost entirely based on Hindu texts. So how is it a universal? Sorry?
Entirely based on
Hindu texts. Hindu texts.
On Hindu texts.
Hindu
yeah,
texts.
yeah. But
So therefore, to call it a universal religion based on Hindu texts is a kind of a contradiction. That much one has to admit, because there is this cultural nationalism in Ramon also working at places. Did you know that Ramon, much before Keshav Sen, while in England, he objected to someone's painting Christ to be a very fair-looking guy. He said he was an Asiatic. How can he be so fair-skinned? He's not a white person. All religions, and look at the pan-Asianism in the man. He said much before Keshav Sen and Vivekananda and Okakura and so on. He said all religions of the world, major religions of the world, were born in Asia. Christ is an Asiatic. Tell me one major religion which is not born in Asia. He said that much
Is
before.
not what?
In
Not
Asia,
born in Asia.
not born in Asia.
He objected to Christ being painted like a white man. So this was Ram Mohan's cultural patriotism at work.
No, well, it's you know, it's true. It's a fact. You know, but Ram Mohan does not use the word Hinduism that I can.
No, this is. I am
identify.
saying this. I am saying this on the authority of Dermot Killingly, who has actually written it down, saying that Ram Mohan was the first to use it in 1816. He's not the first person to do it because the evangelists did it earlier, in the 1780s. But he's the first Indian to do that.
He refers to the Hinduism as Sanatana Dharma.
He doesn't use. He
eternal
doesn't.
Dharma.
He doesn't use that expression, Sanatana Dharma.
Sanatana Dharma?
I don't think he
Of course he
uses that
does.
word.
Of course he does.
Where?
Look at
Anyway, is there any other question? We're getting late.
Yeah, in the interest of time, Smita, maybe.
Yeah.
It's past 9:30.
Yes.
okay, I have the answer for you. Well, okay, I won't take up time here, but I'm looking up Ramohan Samiksha by Devendranath Kumar Bishwash, the Bengali version. No, sorry, it's in English. But I thought I had a Sanatana Dharma. I won't hold you up here. But to check that out.
So, Smita Mukherjee, please wind up. Is there a
Yes,
third session after this?
No. This is, as far as I'm concerned, I think these are some important points that I wanted to address during this session. In
Will there
case
be a
some of the,
question after this?
in case some of the audience have questions. Oh, I see Dr. Conrad Elst also here. If there is some question, then Tanya can conduct that. Over
Yes,
to Tanya.
namaste to the esteemed panelists, and we have Dr. Conrad Elst with us.
Can you hear me?
Yes, he's a Belgian Indologist with a master's in Indology, Sinology, and Philosophy. And he is one of the Westerners to actively defend
Oh,
Hinduism.
he's too well known to be introduced. So please, let's skip that part.
Yes.
So let's hear him.
Dr. Elst, can you hear us?
Well, can you hear me?
Yes.
First of all,
You're breaking up. I'm sorry.
can you unmute me if necessary?
I'm just looking for his.
Please continue.
Okay. Yes. Okay. First, a few helpful additions, I hope, about Unitarianism. I can't authoritatively say to what extent Ram Mohan Roy was involved in that, but to the extent he was, it was very definitely a step into Christianity. Unitarianism can only be understood as one viewpoint within the Christian spectrum. Namely, it started with a Spanish theologian in the 16th century, Michael Servetus, who criticized the doctrine of the Trinity, who said, you see, this is really an unbiblical doctrine. On the Bible, we can only base the belief in one God, hence the notion Unitarianism. So people like the present day Indian secularists and so on, who interpret this in the sense of, the unity of all religions and so on, they don't really understand what they're talking about. Then, as for the definition of Hindu, He or certainly one of his contemporaries may well have been the first to add the English suffix ism to Hindu. I am not sure about that. But more important is that the term Hindu is at least 1,000 years older. You see, it was an ancient Iranian term, meaning India, and it changed meaning, or it acquired an extra dimension when the Muslim invaders brought the term into India. And then it immediately acquired a communal meaning. Namely, it meant every Indian who is not a Muslim. Later, it was a bit more refined, like who also is not a Christian and so on. But essentially, every pagan Hindu, every kafir Indian is a Hindu. This means that Buddhists and Jains and tribals and Dalits and so on, they are all automatically Hindu, according to that definition, which is largely taken over by the constitution, by the Hindu code law, by Savarkar's Hindutva definition. And it's a historically correct, simple, straightforward definition. And so with Ram Mohan Roy, and later on with, for example, Balagangadhar Tilak, you get a number of anglicized Hindus who try to mold Hinduism in the shape of Christianity, which is a doctrinal religion. You are a Christian if you believe this, this, and this, and you are not one if you don't believe it. And so they try to say, a Hindu is someone who believes in reincarnation, who believes in the Vedas, and so on. Each of these is historically quite up for criticism. But at any rate, the whole basic approach, Hindu is if you accept a certain doctrines, that is historically quite incorrect. Though at that time it's understandable with the British domination and so on. This was perhaps inevitable, but essentially it is wrong. About Sati. Sati, this is the first thing I heard here this evening. Sati, it's interesting that you say that already Ram Mohan Roy noticed that it's not present in the Shastras. You see, back then, Sati was very eagerly used by British missionaries to prove how evil Hinduism is and how badly the Indians need conversion to Christianity. This is a replay of what happened in the time of the Bible when it was found that the Canaanite native religion of the Holy Land, they practiced child sacrifice. And so this was then played up by the biblical prophets. Look, if you're a pagan, it means you're going to commit these crimes, which is very questionable. Many religions abolished human sacrifice and so on out of themselves under no pressure at all. So this is a normal feat of human progress. So that was then identified with Christianity. You see, to be a good person, to treat women correctly, you have to become a Christian. You can't be a Hindu. Hinduism implies these evil practices, when in fact, this is not the case at all. So about the Shastras, my knowledge is limited. I take your word for it that it's not in there. At any rate, in the beginning of Hinduism, the picture is extremely clear. In the Rig Veda, there is one instance of sati where a woman is about to commit sati and she is led away from the funeral pyre. And she's explained that, okay, his life is over, but your life goes on. You should rejoin the world of the living. So you have two things there. On the one hand, against some Hindu chauvinists who claim that sati is un-Hindu, it testifies that sati existed since the very beginning of Hinduism, or of society in India at any rate. Whereas the religious doctrinal viewpoint is immediately, from the very first instance, turned against sati. And so if Ram Mohan Roy made the action against sati, which ultimately he entrusted to the East India Company, but his arguments at any rate are very very consequential for Hindus. Namely, if you want to take Hinduism seriously, then stop practicing sati. That's entirely correct. Then there was one more thing. Yes, one thing I had a problem with in the first speaker was the idea that if Ramohan Roy had spoken a century earlier in favor of the popularization of the Vedas, that he would have been burned a century earlier. Now that I take issue with. I am not aware of anyone in Indian history who was burned for his opinions. Like the Buddha died of food poisoning at 80, Basava, with his anti-caste issues and so on. He also died peacefully and so on. So I think that is a projection of Christian practices. Like, for instance, the Michael Servetus, whom we mentioned as the originator of Unitarianism, or from a Catholic perspective, the Unitarian heresy. He died at the stake. He was burned alive. So in Hinduism, I don't see that happening, not at any time. Okay, this much for now.
Thank you, Dr. Els. Would any of the professors like to respond to that?
Professor Robertson wants to say something.
No,
Yeah.
I just think I think those are very interesting and very clear comments to make. But I was only saying that the word Hinduism was is not, it's a European ism. But the earliest the word that I don't see any use of the word Hinduism in his and Ramahan's Bengali editions. And the only thing I saw was Sanatana Dharma as the word for the eternal religion. That's what it means, actually.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, and one more little remark about Jesus being white. Jesus being white. You see, that already is an application of the very contemporary or contemporaneous principle that skin color doesn't matter in the case of the Messiah or of the Son of God. The whole idea of Christ in Christianity is precisely that God incarnated to become one of us. Therefore, it is perfectly acceptable, even though historically not correct, that you depict Jesus as, for instance, black, which the Ethiopian church since the 3rd or so century has effectively been doing. And so you can depict Jesus as Indian or as Chinese, whatever. This is all perfectly theologically correct.
Okay, it's not incorrect. There's a difference between being correct and not incorrect. The issue never came up. This is the color of Jesus is the color of every other Jew in his lifetime. He was a Jew. He was a product of Jewish culture. And in the summertime, Jews are a little darker than others, like me. When in the summertime, but color became an issue promoted by certain groups of people, saying that we're that want to acquire a legitimacy when they don't need it. There are a lot of it's hard to. I think it's important to separate all the nonsense issues from the real issues. And when you get down to it, the Hindu tradition is by its own definition, the Sanatana Dharma, meaning it is the eternal order of things. And that, it doesn't say for white people or left-handed people or blondes or whatever. It's humanity. It's the human. It's the Homo sapiens. You know, if you go back to the earliest religion of the Homo sapiens, you know, that you get back to issues like this. There
If
are divisive issues.
if I might make a small insertion, I think Dr. L's question is more in the context of how present-day conversions are being carried on, which never had any relevance at the time of Ram Mohan Roy, which was roughly 200 years back. But let me just invite Dr. Sain, because these comments came from Dr. Sain, to shortly just respond on this, please.
No, I have nothing to respond to. I am pretty sure. I am not the person to claim that he used the word Hinduism 1816. I say this on the authority of a very distinguished scholar whose judgment and information I trust, and this is Professor Dermot Killingly, who used to be at one of the universities in Middle England, I think. Was it Newcastle? I'm not sure. But anyway, I trust his judgment entirely. It is very clear to me that Hinduism, being an English word, will not be in his Bangla writings. And that's pretty obvious. How can that be in Bangla writings?
And this is Kanchan. I have found in his letters and writings using the word Hinduism in different contexts. But surely, as Professor Sen said, it was not an invention of Ram Mohan Roy. And I have evidence enough to, I can share later offline, that Hinduism term was used at least 40 years before Ram Mohan Roy used.
I think by Charles Grant, if I'm not mistaken.
Grant, yes. Grant was using in a letter, but whether Grant actually invented, we don't know. But Grant was the first evidence we find that he's writing in a letter.
Oh, that's interesting. Could you give me the
we'll share it offline.
Yeah, that would be great. Yeah. But the general term for Hinduism was Sanatana Dharma.
That is true. In Bengali writings, he did not.
Yes. But maybe I would be more specific. I don't know about Hindi, but the Sanatana Dharma, the eternal order of things, it's what you cannot dispute. It's like you're arguing against gravity.
Yeah.
You know, there is no such thing as gravity.
Now. So, Smita, can we end the event now? It's pretty late. It's almost 10 o'clock.
Yeah. Tanya, I would
just wind up, please. Yeah.
Yes. Thank you so much to all the esteemed panelists, and thank you, Dr. Conrad Els, for joining us at such a short notice. We'll conclude now, and thank you for this wonderful episode of the first part of the series Luminaries of Bengal in association with Bangla Abar. I've dropped the links of Bangla Abar website. Please go to the website and find out more. Thank you, Kanchanda, and we'll do the concluding comments by Chandan Bandopadhyay ji, also of Bangla Abar, to please speak. Chandan ji, bringing you on.
So, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
The conceiver of the entire show.
Yeah, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay, good. So, thank you so much, everyone. And I think it was a great experience, learning so many new things. So, I'd like to take 5 minutes quickly and conclude the session. And I hope that it's okay with everyone, right? Hello?
Yes, Chandan.
Okay, good. So anyways, we have heard a lot about our guest speakers spoke, and there are certain things I'd like to summarize in our, thanking note. So, and some of the things I may or may not agree with some of the speakers, what they said. So first and foremost is that Ram Mohan Roy was considered the only living Vedantist by the Indologists of that time. Now, he translated five Upanishads. That doesn't be, and he didn't translate another 5 or 10, doesn't make him a non-Vedantist. So that's one point I want to make. And certainly we can say that he was indeed the father of modern Vedanta, said by many. Second thing I'd like to say that there are many things we didn't talk about here today. So I believe that it's important that we at least touch upon some of these topics. Second thing is that he started a society called Brahma Samaj. It's a religio-social society where he not only taught Vedas and Upanishads, but he also revived the Tantra, worship of Tantra, for example, and which was completely hidden back in those times or corrupted by certain malpractices. Now, Dr. Sen said that he was completely against Murti Puja and so forth, but I kind of disagree with him on that, and I believe that he was one of the first persons who defended Murti Puja, at least towards the Christian missionaries. So we certainly cannot say he was completely against the Murti Pujas. The next point I'd like to make is this, that back in those days, the Hindu society was divided. In fact, this is something Dr. Sen said very well, that this concept of Hindu Dharma, it wasn't there. So we had these Saivites, we had the Vedantists, we had Shaktas, Vaishnavas, and so forth. So it was the Ram Mohan, for the first time, he came up with this umbrella group name called Hindu Dharma or Hinduism. So obviously there's a confusion there between Dr. Sen and Dr. Robertson. I think in his Bengali versions, he used the words Hindu Dharma. And in English version, sometimes he used Hinduism. But he meant the same thing, which is Hindu Dharma. So that's another thing we need to understand. And next point I'd like to make is this, that speaking of him being an internationalist and international scholars, now that point Dr. Robertson touched upon a little bit, but I'd like to say that he was the first Indian internationalist and greatest ever Hindu Indian celebrity. And I believe that Dr. Bruce is writing a book on that. We're looking forward to that. It was him who influenced the European and American intelligentsia significantly. Now, we didn't talk about that on this talk today, maybe next time. Now, his books were read by who's who all over the world, particularly in Europe and America. For example, Quincy Adams, Jefferson, Thoreau, Emerson, you name it, they all read his book. And Mr. Emerson from New England, where I come from, Boston, so he started this movement called Transcendentalism after reading Ram Mohan's book, the Upanishads. And he was the first ideologue. Again, this is a very important thing we touched upon in today's call, that he was the ideologue globally to inspire freedom fighters and revolutionaries across the globe to free nations from colonialism. He opposed all kinds of slavery, including the black slavery, the Irish slavery, and so on and so forth. That imagine an Indian going to London and he's speaking about that, the kind of guts one need to have. As a tribute, when Spain became independent, they dedicated their constitution to the name of Ram Mohan Roy. He was popular in America, and he was so popular in America, just to give you an example, that then the president of Harvard University came all the way to London to invite him by stating, "Sir, the entire America is waiting for you." I'm not sure that any Indian so far has received that kind of tribute or respect. In terms of political freedom, we didn't really talk about it. Just quickly touch upon, he was the first Indian to envision the home rule, an independent India. For that, all great freedom fighters were directly or indirectly inspired. I will give you some quotes quickly. He was the first Indian to represent India to the British Parliament. And by the way, I have certain information I've received that he in fact revolted against British under a different name. Again, that's another topic altogether. Today's India's constitution has much to owe him, because much of his talks, speeches, writings are reflected clearly in today's India's constitution. Again, we talked about a little bit about the Indian education, so he can be considered as the father of modern Indian education. As Ram Mohan Roy, India's education system from the worst ever disaster. Now that's something I'd like to emphasize on, nobody talked about it. Now back then, we had those Sanskrit tolls, Sanskrit education system, and then British came, the missionaries came, and then they wanted to start English medium schools. So imagine if we had two choices. One is English medium schools, one is Sanskrit speaking education system. What people are going to do? Obviously, they're going to join the English medium schools. So Ram Mohan came up with an alternative. He says that we can have a trilingual system where you learn English, you keep Sanskrit, and also you learn your native language. For example, he wrote Bengali prose. Then he also wrote many essays and writings in Hindi. And by the way, he can be called as the father of Hindi language with Devanagari script. I repeat, you heard it right, that he was also the father of Hindi language with Devanagari script. Prior to that, Hindi was written in Farsi and an Arabic script. So then again, one more quick thing, that the scientific education, after centuries of foreign rule, for example, India had lost the linkage with our ancient scientific traditions. Again, it was Ram Mohan who brought back the tradition. So that's another important thing. Now, speaking about the superstitions and so forth, it was Ram Mohan who first crossed the Kalapani. And it was very important, as per Swami Vivekananda. I'd like to quote what he said. It's very, very interesting. Vivekananda said, we did not go out, that we did not compare notes with other countries. That has been the one great cause of our downfall. And every one of you knows that little stir, the little life that you see in India begins from the day when Raja Ram Mohan Roy broke through the walls of that exclusiveness. Since that day, history in India has taken another turn, and now it is growing with accelerated motion. So again, that is Swami Vivekananda. And he was the first to voice against all kinds of harmful traditions that include sati, child marriages, polygamy, and so on and so forth. Again, he was the pioneer on that. He also, in fact, revived Sanskrit. Now, people may blame him that, because he killed Sanskrit and so forth. But I personally think that he revived Sanskrit. He was the first to say the Sanskrit to be the national language of India. And obviously, we don't have much time, so I'm not going to give you all the details. And not just that, he also, being one of the greatest Sanskrit scholars, he was the first to bring forth and promote Sanskrit treasures like Upanishads and Vedas, and not just for some limited Sanskrit-knowing pundits, but for everyone. So that was one of his greatest contributions. Then economics, on the side of the economics, he was the first person to calculate how much this East India Company is draining out money from India. Now, again, that is something he was keen to work on. He was also the father of journalism. Again, very few people know about that he started various newspapers, first Indian to start newspapers in various languages in India as well. And again, I kind of disagree with Dr. Sen on this, that about the interreligious studies, that he learned, now before I give you this, why I disagree, he learned Old Testament to study, he learned Hebrew to study Old Testament. He learned Latin and Greek to study New Testament. He studied Arabic to learn Islam. He studied Farsi to learn Zoroastrianism, and of course Sanskrit to learn Hindu scriptures. And he was the first Indian to evaluate Jesus and Christianity. He was the first to evaluate Islam and Muhammad. And rightly, Mr. Max Muller, we're talking about Max Muller himself said that Ram Mohan is the father of interreligious studies. Again, I can provide all the information later on the sites. Again, he was the first person who started Dharma Youth against the Christian missionaries and the conversions. He openly debated the Christian missionaries and defeated them emphatically. And again, he was father of all relevant movements as per many freedom fighters such as Bipin Chandra Pal, Lala Lajpat Rai, Chittaranjan Das, that Ram Mohan started all relevant movements in India that were required to make India free. And again, one more thing, that he was not just a dry intellectual kind of a guy, he was also a person embodied with Gyan, Bhakti, and Karma. And as per the message of Big Gita, and he is the father of modern Indian or the Hindu. Okay, there's another thing I'd like to say, that it is Ram Mohan who brought back the Hindu Dharma and connected to the ancient Vedas. And at the same time, he's the one who talked about the patriotism, talked about being pride to important culture and history. So one way we can call that Ram Mohan was indeed the father of Hindu nationalism. Again, we can talk on this subject itself on a separate occasion. And finally, I'd like to say that he was such a great man, and nobody talked about it, that every single person, at least in 1947, was inspired by him. Every single person. To give you a name, Dayananda Saraswati, who started Arya Samaj. Again, he was highly inspired by Ram Mohan Roy. Then we have, due to his inspiration, Prarthana Samaj, Veda Samaj, and other societies were created. Bankim Chandra Chatterjee, as you know him, he wrote Bande Mataram. He said, "But the first time we see the importance of Hindu Dharma since Ram Mohan," and he gave him, he paid him highest respect. Just to mention, Swami Vivekananda, for example, said, again, this is something nobody talked about. Swami Vivekananda said, "I learned Vedanta and patriotism from Raja Ram Mohan Roy, and I am just following the roadmap that was given to me by Ram Mohan Roy." And this is as per Sister Nivedita. Sri Aurobindo, for example, one of the great sages of modern India, he said that Ram Mohan was the first active genius who transformed our national life. Again, he was a Brahmo Samaji, as you know, Aurobindo, and both Vivekananda in earlier time. And for example, Gurudev Rabindranath Tagore, he said that Ram Mohan gave the new life to Hindu Dharma. Ram Mohan protected the Indian civilization from the Western civilization and resisted all the missionaries. If Ram Mohan wasn't there, a serious, irreparable damage would have happened to Indian society. That was Rabindranath Tagore, and he said many, many good things about Ram Mohan that we can talk about some other time. Subhash Chandra Bose considered that he was the prophet of modern India. And he also said that it was Ram Mohan who brought back Vedanta into India again. Mahatma Gandhi, for example, he said that Ram Mohan was the father of higher studies in Hinduism. Again, he paid also great respect to him. Lala Rajpat Rai, Justice Rana Dey, Gopal Krishna Gokhale all called him the father of modern India. And the list is unending, and I can go on and on. In a nutshell, I can say he was one of the rare personality to whom everyone paid the highest respect. But unfortunately, today we hear all those comments and so on and so forth. So maybe we can take up these issues and so on some other time. So that's all I had to say. And so thank you so much, everyone. And namaskar.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Chandanda. Thank you so much for joining and giving all those very important, points. And you've been the organizer of getting, the series along with Sangam Talks together. I thank you. And you very rightly said, when we look back in history, we see that all the freedom fighters and, all the great luminaries of the freedom struggle and before that, they all have nothing but awe and praise and looking up to Rajarshi Ram Mohan Roy. It is now that we get to hear from these, they call themselves Twitter, kind of academics or Facebook academics and all that, and they just go about for sensationalizing things and making everything into black and white, not looking at anything in context. And that is sad. We should rather rely on the people who knew him personally, who were there in those times, who were great visionaries, great freedom fighters, great sons of the soil, and what they had to say, and also look at it in context, in the cultural and the context of time. I think that's true scholarship and true academic rigor, which needs to be applied. Else it is just screaming, trolling, and everyone can just get up and write anything to prove themselves a nationalist at the cost of defaming our very own luminaries. So with that, thank you so much. Chandanda, you have something to say.
I just wanted to ask a quick question, if possible, that there is a Twittery person, he's tweeting all the time, and if Dr. Bruce is still there, I'd like to ask this question to Dr. Bruce. That they're saying that Ram Mohan supposedly had said that India and England, two Christian nations, will be working together. So was that true? Did Ram Mohan say that? So England is a Christian country and India is a Christian, and to be a Christian country, and he worked on that. I just want to ask this question to Dr. Robertson, if he's still available.
Yes, I'm available. I've never run into that comment at all. I haven't run into it, and I would be surprised if there is any comment, any document of that. That did me like Ram Mohan Roy. But again, we're not. I'm not the last word. I defer to Professor Amia Sen on everything.
Right, right. So I think probably we need to have another call in the near future to clarify a few other things, if it's possible.
Thank you so much, Chandanda. Yes, we can definitely do that whenever, whenever Bangla Abar and whenever you and Kanchanda say. Thank you so much, Professor Bruce Carlyle Robertson, for joining us. We are extremely honored, and we are really privileged to have you. Professor Amiya Prasad Sen, thank you so much for joining. We are indebted and honored to have you. Thank you, Bangla Abar, for joining with Sangam Talks and holding this academic and scholarly debate on the context and on the actual, writings and all the other facts that should be brought into this debate and having a proper debate. Thank you so much. And Smita ji, you've been a speaker with Sangam Talks, and we look up to you. Thank you so much for joining and bringing your scholarship into it. Kanchanda, thank you for joining. Kanchan Bandyopadhyay ji, thank you so much for joining. Thank you, Chandan Bandyopadhyay ji, for joining. And thank you, Bangla Abar. From Sangam Talks, it's a good night to everybody in India and all over the world. We'll see you next time. Thank you. Namaste.